succeed in the growing legalized sports betting market in Brazil. I'm Emma Lindley, Director of International Expansion at CAF, and I'm here today with Luis Meyer, co-founder of Meyershire Yogusu, an expert in gambling law. Luis, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm super interested in what's happening in the Brazil market. And let's begin our discussion just by talking about the status of the regulation and just tell us what's currently happening.
Hi, Emma. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here talking about, once again, regulation in Brazil. It's I know it's a little bit frustrating for everybody. It's everyone has high expectations about Brazil. We are always very close to having some regulation in place, and then something happens and we have to wait a little longer. We heard from the government that they had the provisional measure, which is a law that is enacted by the president, subject to confirmation, amendment, or rejection by the Congress. That such provisional measure was ready to be signed and was going to be published at any time. Then the president traveled internationally. He went to the coronation in London. Some other things happened. And for political reasons, now we are facing a change of strategy, and now the government is not going to propose a provisional measure anymore. They are negotiating with the Speaker of the House the proposal of a bill of law. And the main difference between the provisional measure and the bill of law is that the provisional measure is enforceable at the time it is published. And the bill of law needs to be approved by the Congress to be enforceable. And also the provisional measure, they have 60 plus 60 days, 120 days to vote it. And the bill of law, it depends on whether they're going to be able to approve a motion for urgency or not. If they approve the motion for urgency, then they have 90 days, 45 plus 45. If they don't approve the motion for urgency, then it's an ordinary bill of law that can take forever. But now we have other complications. Recently, we had several cases of match fixing scandals in Brazil. Several results under suspicion. Some players were arrested, some police investigations and operations in Goiás and other states involving soccer in different levels in Brazil. And this resulted in the opening of what we call a CPI. It's Congressional Investigation Procedure, where Congressmen and deputados will investigate these match-fixing scandals and they have 180 days to do that. According to the work plan, they will work on this investigation until September. The rapporteur of this investigation commission is the same rapporteur of the gambling bill, who is very likely to be the same rapporteur of the sports betting bill. And now nobody knows exactly how long the discussion of the sports betting bill will take. Of course, it makes sense to infer that because of these investigations, the process can be delayed because, well, theoretically, they could learn from this investigation several issues that could be used to improve the regulation, and that could be used as an excuse to delay even further the regulation. At the same time, the gambling bill is going forward at the Senate. It went to the Justice and Constitution Commission, where it's going to be discussed. So I think we all expected to see sports betting regulation until the end of the second quarter in Brazil, and now we honestly don't know if you're going to see this until the end of the year.
Okay, so just to recap what I think you've heard you say, there's a kind of a number of moving parts which are potentially going to, well, they are going to delay the regulation coming into force. But it sounds like it's likely to happen. But there's going to be a delay. And I guess, when the regulation happens, operators, they're still going to have to get a license. It's a huge market. We're seeing a lot of, here at CAF, we're seeing a lot of operators starting to think about how they're going to get geared up to get a license. What would you say, in your view, what would be the main challenges for operators wanting to get a license and operate in Brazil?
Brazil is going to be a very difficult market to navigate from the regulatory standpoint, because we have, talking about sports betting specifically, we have the federal license, we have the state license, we have the municipal license. Currently, we have Rio de Janeiro, Paraná, Paraíba, Maranhão working on their lotteries, and some other states as well. But Rio de Janeiro has an open tender for, not a tender, but a accreditation procedure for sports betting. Paraná has just opened their procedure. And both of those procedures, they have an issue. The payment solution, the use of the payment solution from the states is mandatory, and the cost of that payment solution is extremely high. We're talking about 2.5-3% on turnover, plus 1% on winnings, so on payouts, which makes it extremely expensive. Even though the taxation is lower compared to the federal level, the payment service provider is extremely expensive. It makes the operation almost infeasible. We are discussing with some clients the legality of that obligation to use that payment service providers. We understand that it's illegal for the state to obligate the companies to use specifically that one payment service providers, but that needs to be challenged in court. So I think the key challenges will be taxation and these other costs that are hidden in the operation. So when you say taxation, we mean the taxes, these mandatory payment costs, inspection fees, and other fees that are that the operator will have to pay. Frauds, I think these match fixing scandals just show the level of fraud that we have in Brazil that is extremely high. And litigation, I think once these companies arrive in Brazil and start operating in Brazil, they're going to face a level of litigation that they are not used to. The small claims litigation in Brazil is an issue for all consumer related companies. Mm-hmm. If you talk about telecom companies, cell phone, TV, they have thousands and thousands and thousands of lawsuits pending all over the country, and they have to deal with that, and that generates a very significant cost operational costs for the companies, because in Brazil, any consumer claim can be filed as a lawsuit, as a small claim consumer lawsuit. And the consumer doesn't need to hire a lawyer to file a lawsuit, even though there are lawyers doing that based on success. And if the consumer loses, they don't have to pay anything. They don't have to pay any cost, cost for the use of the judiciary system. They don't have to pay any fees for the company. So the company has all the costs of hiring lawyers, paying fees, and the consumer has absolutely no risk. So the trade-off is quite complicated, but at the end of the day, they get a day out of work because they have an excuse not to work because they're in court. And if they lose, that's what they have. If they win, they get some money.
Yep. Okay.
So this is going to be very, very challenging.
Some of the areas around increasing litigation. So it sounds like, there's going to be stuff around kind of taxes, thinking through different payment providers, litigation, and, kind of we touched on this area of fraud. And I think it was interesting what you were saying about, match fixing, because match fixing isn't new in the gambling industry. It's been even if you go back to kind of ancient Greece, there was reports of kind of betting on outcomes of particular games. So it's a human nature thing. And I think just my perspective of having worked with a number of the different regulators over the years and looked at how markets like the UK have evolved. Match fixing has been something that has always happened, so it's no surprise really that it's happening in a market like Brazil. I guess thinking about what's happened in the UK, what we've seen is things like the Football Association completely putting a ban on any players being able to make bets, for example. And we've across Europe, we've had the convention, the Mandolin Convention, which essentially was to take corruption out of sport. So there's been quite a lot of kind of changes in regulation to ensure that sport is kept clean of things like match fixing and corruption is kept out. But I think there's also been a lot of work being done by the operators themselves to make sure that they're not caught up and they don't have people operating on their platforms, people who are betting on their platforms, that are able to get away with things like match fixing as well, and those sort of betting patterns. In terms of your experience, what do you think some of the other areas that operators are going to have to focus on?
I think one of the critical issues regarding match fixing is to identify those involved. And the matter of KYC comes to mind. I think once the market becomes regulated and the operators are required to do a proper KYC with the identification of the players and ID checking, it becomes riskier for those involved in those schemes. Of course, you have identity theft in some cases, but with a good fraud prevention system and with a good KYC procedure, you can identify cases of identity theft. I think also because of litigation, that will be critical, I think, to show that it was really the player making the bets and that there was no one disappearing with their funds as they usually claim, that they did the deposit and so on. So I really think that fraud prevention and KYC will be critical for any betting operation in Brazil.
Yeah, 100%.
And in this sense, I think you know this stuff much more than I do.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually just looking at some of the statistics around match fixing, and Brazil and South America and Latam is actually one of the areas, one of the markets where match fixing has increased. So there's a company called Sports Radar that they track a lot of this kind of match fixing across the globe, and it's had over a 70% increase in the Brazil region on match fixing, and on those outcomes of gambling. And I think it's interesting what you were saying about the identity really being so important to stop that type of behavior happening. Because, as you say, if you do really good KYC on players as they're onboarding, making sure that they are who they say they are to a good level of identity assurance, it's less likely that those players are going to behave in that type of way, because they're going to know that they've been to some kind of level of identity assurance. It means that fraudsters can't create lots of false identities on a platform and start to do, lots of types of betting with perhaps stolen cards, or betting on the outcomes of matches and doing match fixing, because they can only use their identity. And I think, as you said, when it comes to the point of having to go, well, these people have been involved, and comes to prosecution, you can say, yes, it was definitely these people involved using these identities. And one of the things that I think about the Brazil market, with, CAF being the fastest growing identity organization and company in Brazil, we obviously know all of the nuances of the Brazilian market. There's huge amounts of fraud in the Brazilian market. As I said, the match fixing is increasing in the Brazilian market. So I think it's really important that operators are using a sufficient level of identity verification. Now, in Brazil, lots of people use the CPF number to identify themselves. But as we know, in 2021, the entire CPF database was breached. So just using the CPF, it may well identify that person, but it actually doesn't stop me, for example, taking your CPF and registering for an account. Operators, in our opinion, really need to be doing more. They need to be looking at things like biometrics, which is widely used in a market like Brazil, and things like document verification. Brazil, again, a very complex market with documents. There are about 3,500 identity document types in Brazil, so that makes it really complex. But using some of these additional ways to verify people's identity, to make sure that they are putting a level of assurance around that identity, that if that person was involved in match fixing, they could then be, the operator themselves could say, I definitely know that it's this person, and they could potentially be prosecuted. Because it's not good for operators to have this type of behavior happening on their platforms, because it has a potential reputational risk for those operators.
Not only reputational risk, but also financial risk. At the end of the day, they have to pay the bets to those fraudsters. And
100%. Yeah. And just, we're talking to lots of operators now who are really excited about entering the Brazilian market, and we're working with lots of the global gambling operators. What advice would you give to operators entering the sports market in Brazil for the first time?
Be patient. Don't let yourself go wild with the size of the market, because I think it's very easy to go crazy with the numbers, because the numbers are very high. Be careful with marketing investments, because you have all kinds. Some of them will bring actually no return at all. So you need to be well advised in terms of marketing. We have seen people burning cash like crazy and getting absolutely no result, while others have managed to grow quite quickly with a smart allocation of resources. And I think you need to understand that Brazil is a different market. It doesn't matter whether you're successful abroad. Of course, this experience is valid, but you have to understand that the Brazilian market has its own specificities and its own way of behaving, and the Brazilian clients have their own way of. So I think it's good to have some local people advising on the product front, not only in the legal but also on the product.
Yeah, absolutely. We're finding that as we're talking to operators, they're saying to us, we just don't know the Brazil market. Educators, tell us how it operates, tell us about the types of fraud that you see, how do players typically want to onboard. And I think it's about trying to get that balance from a player perspective to make sure that the operators are managing their risk and they're onboarding customers quickly.
I think another issue that I would like to raise is be careful with payment service providers. Make sure that the payment service providers comply with central bank regulations. Okay, I think that's one very important issue.
Yeah, that's good advice. And then a final question for you. What resources or sources of information would you recommend operators who want to just stay updated on what's happening, on the changes and the trends in the Brazilian market? What would you recommend that they should start reading?
I particularly recommend Vixia, Gambling Compliance, and Games Bros magazine. Games Bros, they have it in English and Portuguese. Vixia, Gambling Compliance, they keep it very updated in terms of what is happening in Brazil. They have a very good, very comprehensive approach on regulatory and legal issues. I think those two sources are very useful for the international public. And if you speak Portuguese, also BNL is a good source.
Perfect. So thanks so much, Lewis. Thank you once again for sharing your knowledge and your insights with us and the audience. Super excited to discuss these important matters. It's going to be really interesting to see how things evolve. And really just seeing how operators can succeed in this rapidly growing industry in Brazil. Thanks so much. And thanks to everybody for tuning in. Thanks a lot.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.